All right, everybody. Let's jump into it. Today, we are talking about writing systems.
Okay.
And specifically, we are going to be looking at kanji. I think this is going to be really interesting because there's a lot to unpack here.
Right, and we're tackling a pretty, strong opinion is the idea that kanji sucks.
Yeah, kanji sucks. Like, that's a pretty bold statement.
Yeah.
So we're going to, really get into the nitty-gritty of why someone would even say that.
Yeah. What's behind that?
Yeah.
Because it's so interesting when you think about writing systems, there is this inherent, we have feelings about it.
Totally.
You see a writing system, you're like, oh, that's pretty, or, oh, that looks complicated, or I could never learn that.
Like instinctively, right?
Yes.
And it's like, we probably don't even realize, it's just like this,
subconscious
thing. We're judging a book by its cover a little bit.
Absolutely. And this statement, kanji sucks, it really reveals, I think, a perspective of someone who's probably struggled
Totally.
to learn it.
Yes.
And so it's coming from a place of personal experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so interesting because it's like saying, algebra sucks.
Right.
Yeah, maybe your experience of it was terrible.
Right.
But
there's reasons why.
There are reasons it exists. It's a thing.
It's a thing, yeah.
So
we're going to unpack that.
Yeah, so we're going to unpack why someone might say that.
Yeah.
And where they're coming from with that.
And is there any validity to it?
Yeah.
Are there reasons why someone would feel that way?
And I think it's really important to lay the groundwork here a little bit for people who maybe haven't gone down the rabbit hole.
Okay.
That is kanji.
Because for a lot of people, they're coming from alphabets.
Yes.
26 letters, maybe a couple more if you've got, some fun ones.
Right.
But kanji is a whole other beast.
Yeah, it's not just an alphabet.
Right. It's thousands of characters.
Thousands of...
Each one is a concept.
Yes.
It's not like a letter equals a sound.
And this is something that our source really gets into.
Yes.
This idea that it's overly complicated.
Right.
Right, and how that can be such a turnoff for people trying to learn the language.
Yeah, it seems very arbitrary.
Yeah.
Right, and so much to learn.
How could anybody ever learn this?
They use the analogy of, it's like trying to memorize a dictionary.
Oh, wow.
Not just the words, but the dictionary itself.
Wow. Yeah, that's a good analogy.
Yeah. Imagine every single word you learn.
Right.
You've got to learn a whole new symbol.
And I think one of the most interesting and sort of mind-boggling things they point out is that, even the word for read can be pronounced multiple different ways depending on the context.
Depending what other characters it's with.
Yeah.
And that's something that you just don't really find in a phonetic alphabet.
Right.
So I can see how that would be very off-putting for someone coming to the language for the first time.
Yeah, it's a lot to wrap your head around.
It is.
For sure.
It is.
But I think what's really important is what you were alluding to before is there's a historical reason for all of this.
It didn't just happen in a vacuum.
Right.
This wasn't just somebody sitting down and being like, how hard can we make this?
Right.
Let's make this as complicated as possible.
Yeah.
These characters, they came from Chinese script.
Okay.
They evolved over centuries.
Wow.
Think about it.
So they're borrowed characters?
In a way, yes.
Okay.
But they've taken on their own lives.
Right.
And their own meanings and their own pronunciations.
Wow.
Over time.
That's fascinating.
So it's almost like linguistic archaeology when you start to dig into it.
Right.
Because each character has all these layers of meaning and history and pronunciation behind it.
Okay, so it's they're these little vessels of cultural information, history, and all this stuff.
It's beautiful. But I can see how it would be very daunting.
Right.
If you are just trying to learn this.
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword.
It is.
So we kind of understand the historical context a little bit, but the source really seems to hone in on this idea.
It's a big barrier to entry?
Yes, that's a huge barrier to entry.
Yeah.
It's you were saying, it's
especially for a language that's already considered difficult for native English speakers to learn.
Right.
Japanese has its own set of challenges grammatically.
Right.
And then you add this on top of it.
And then you add thousands of characters on top of it.
It's my goodness, how can I possibly do this?
So the source really seems to be this is ridiculous. This is a huge barrier.
It's too much. It's too much.
To entry for anybody who wants to learn this language.
Yeah, and it argues that, because of that, it actually prevents people from learning.
Oh, wow.
It's the hurdle is insurmountable for some people.
Right.
Because they look at it and you were saying, it's why would I do that to myself?
Right.
When I could learn a language where I learn the alphabet, and then I can pretty much sound things out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It does feel very arbitrary when you put it that way.
It does.
You know, like I'm just supposed to memorize that this means this.
Right.
Like,
and even if you memorize it,
right,
it might sound different depending on...
Right. It's like a guessing game.
It is a little bit.
It's like, okay, I've done all this work to memorize all of this, and now you're telling me it could be completely wrong.
Exactly.
Depending on the situation.
Depending on the context.
Yeah.
Which I imagine can be very frustrating as a learner.
For sure.
Especially...
as someone who wants very clear rules.
Yes.
You know, very black and white.
Like, tell me the rules and I'll follow them.
Yes, and this is very much not that.
Right.
This is like, well, it depends.
It depends.
And you'll get a feel for it, after you've learned these thousands of characters.
And you spent like years learning.
It'll just come to you.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Okay, great. That's exactly what I wanted to hear.
Don't worry about it.
Don't worry about it.
You'll get there.
Great. Okay, cool.
Eventually.
But one of the things that I thought was really interesting is that while, yes, this is a huge challenge, like, it's undeniable.
Yeah. The source does a really good job of like actually pointing to some studies that have been done.
Yes.
That show that learning kanji actually does have cognitive benefits.
Yeah, this is fascinating.
Which I thought was so interesting.
It is, because you think, okay, it's hard.
Right.
It's a lot of memorization.
It's a workout.
But it turns out your brain likes a workout.
Really?
It does. It's good for it.
Like literally?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's like going to the gym, but for your brain.
Exactly. It's
right.
like cognitive exercise.
Right.
And they've done studies and they've found that learning kanji can actually improve your memory.
Okay.
Which makes sense because you're memorizing so much.
Right, you're having to recall so much information.
But also your spatial reasoning skills.
Okay, how about the spatial reasoning skills?
Mm-hmm.
How does that work with like a written character?
Okay, so think about it. You're learning to recognize all these tiny little differences in these characters.
Right.
Like the stroke order.
Right.
The placement of different radicals.
Right.
Where they are in relation to each other.
Right.
It's like a visual puzzle.
Okay.
And so your brain is having to work.
It's like Tetris.
Yes, exactly.
But in your brain.
Yes.
With these little characters.
Exactly. And so it's activating these parts of your brain that maybe don't get as much use.
Okay.
If you're just dealing with a phonetic alphabet.
Interesting. And so they've actually found that, like, it helps people with their spatial reasoning.
Yes.
Wow.
It's incredible.
So, okay, so we're saying it's like a brain workout.
It is.
It's like lifting weights for your brain.
Yes.
So, like...
sign me up.
Sign me up
for the kanji gym.
For the kanji gym, exactly.
Need to do it.
But even with all of that, the source still kind of comes back around to this idea that, like, okay...
yeah.
Maybe there are cognitive benefits, but...
yeah.
In our modern digital age...
yeah.
This is just not practical.
Right.
Like, it's just not practical anymore.
It's outdated.
It's kind of outdated, and they specifically talk about...
typing.
Like, how do you even type this many characters?
Like, imagine how big that keyboard would have to be.
I know.
Right?
And this is something that I've always wondered.
Yeah, it's a valid point.
Because it does seem like...
okay. In our digital age where speed and efficiency is so important...
yes.
You know, everyone's trying to get things done faster.
Right.
How does kanji fit into that?
How does this work?
Yeah.
You know?
It's a valid question. It's a good question.
And I think that's one of the things that I appreciate about the source is that they're not shying away from that.
Right.
They're acknowledging, like, yeah, this is a legitimate concern.
So are they, like, anti-technology, or are they, like...
No, they're not anti-technology.
Okay.
But they're saying that technology should work for us.
Right.
Right? And if we're constantly having to fight against technology,
right,
then maybe it's not serving its purpose.
Interesting. Okay.
Right.
So what's their solution then? Like, what do they propose?
Well, I think their point is more to raise the question.
Okay.
And to have people start thinking about it.
Okay.
Because it's not a simple answer.
Right.
You know, it's not like we can just get rid of kanji.
Right.
It's a huge part of Japanese culture and history.
Right. But at the same time, if it's preventing people from engaging with that culture,
right,
then maybe there needs to be some sort of compromise.
Interesting. So they're not necessarily saying get rid of it. They're just saying, like, we need to think about this.
We need to have a conversation about it.
Right.
Because the world is changing.
Right.
Technology is changing.
Technology is changing constantly.
And so maybe the way that we interact with language needs to change as well.
That's interesting. I never even thought about it like that.
Yeah.
That we need to, like, reevaluate how we're using language in this new technological age.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Because it's not just about Japan, right?
Oh,
this is
wow.
happening all over the world.
Right.
Languages are evolving at an unprecedented rate because of the internet.
Right, because of technology.
Because of technology, exactly.
And the way that we're all, like, interconnected now.
Yes.
That's a really good point. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, and so this conversation about kanji, it's really a microcosm, I think, of a much larger conversation about language and technology.
That's really interesting.
And how those two things are interacting.
Yeah, and what we want the future of language to look like.
Exactly.
Wow.
Because it's in our hands now.
Yeah, we get to kind of decide how we want to shape this.
To a certain extent, yes.
Wow, that's such a cool way to think about it.
Yeah.
Wow, I'm like, my mind is blown right now.
Good, I'm glad.
But one of the things I do want to get back to, because I do think this is really interesting, is this idea of kanji being a cultural gatekeeper.
Yes.
Because that's something that I don't think we can just gloss over. You know what I mean?
No, it's a valid concern, and it's something that I think is important to address.
Yeah.
Because language is power.
Right.
And when you have a writing system that is as complex and as difficult to learn as kanji, it can create a barrier between those who have access to that language and those who don't.
Right, and those who are on the inside and those who are on the outside.
Exactly.
Right, like this is a club that you can't be part of.
And it's not just about understanding the language. It's about understanding the culture.
Yes.
The nuances.
The jokes. The cultural references.
Right.
All of that is locked away behind this wall of kanji.
Wow.
And so if you can't read kanji, you're missing out on a huge part of that culture. Right. It's like you're on the outside looking in.
Exactly.
And so I can see how that could be really frustrating.
Yeah. And it can be alienating for people who are trying to learn the language and trying to engage with the culture.
Yeah.
But they feel like they're constantly hitting this wall.
This wall.
Of kanji.
Wow. And the source kind of ends on this note of like, what is the future of kanji?
Yeah.
You know, is this something that's going to stick around? Is this something that's going to...
Is this sustainable?
Is it sustainable? Exactly.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really interesting because it's like...
It's a big question.
It's a big question.
And there's no easy answer.
And I love that they don't try to provide one.
No.
You know, because I think...
It's not our place.
Right, it's not our place to say like, this is the answer.
We don't have the answer.
Right.
And honestly, I don't think there is one right answer.
Right.
It's going to depend on what people value.
Exactly.
You know, what do people prioritize?
Right. Is it ease of learning?
Is it cultural preservation? Is it cognitive benefits? You know, there's all these different factors.
And all these competing priorities.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I think the important thing is to have the conversation.
Yes.
To be aware of these different perspectives and to be respectful of those different viewpoints.
100%. And I think, you know, in our world today, it's so easy to just be like, this is the right way.
Yes.
Like, this is how it should be.
Black and white.
Exactly. And I think this is a really good example of something where it's like...
Nuance.
Nuance. Thank you.
It's messy. It's complicated.
It's complicated. That's okay.
And that's okay.
Like, we don't need to have all the answers.
Right.
But we do need to be having these conversations. So I think that's a really great place to leave it.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I think so.
I hope that this was interesting for you guys. I hope that this gave you some food for thought.
Yeah.
And yeah, let us know what you think.
Yes.
We would love to hear from you.
Let us know your thoughts on kanji.
Yeah. Does it suck?
Or does it not?
Or does it not? Like, what are your thoughts?
Let us know.
Reaching
even